Hi and welcome everybody to another recap video of the GRENKE Freestyle Chess Open, and this game was a very special one for me because I could play against one of the players which I admire quite a lot and whose chessable courses I bought and which helped me quite a lot to raise my own level of chess. And the guy I'm talking about is WESLEY So from the United States, number 12 in the world. There is not so often the chance for me to play against such a strong guy. So I was paired against him in round 4 and we started from this position. I was playing from the white side. Again, we go slow, thinking about starting position, which options do I have to open the game here, and my thinking process. So first, as always, check for unprotected pawns, but there are really none. They are all protected. Another thing which really sticks out is this knight here. If the knight goes there, then it's already like predefined how you activate the bishops. But maybe there are some ways around this. So this is of course normal play, but it's not the only way to develop this kingside. Another question which always arose to me over the board is like, should I take the center? And I have quite a couple of options to take the center here. I could go c4, d4, or e4. I think all of them are reasonable, but I saw some drawbacks with a few of them. So c4, I thought knight goes to c3, well, but what to do with my queen then, like queen b1? I didn't like this so much. And also like, maybe if I want to go long castle, maybe I do not want my pawn on c4. So I didn't like this too much. d4, it's a question, but it's a pawn in front of the king. Here I thought maybe he can even like play e5 or c5. And yeah, he will just get activity first and later can expand in the center. I was not entirely happy here either. Also, it locks in my queen, so I didn't fancy this move too much. e4, possible, but I think I dislike that I give this square, and maybe c5 is an answer which bothered me a bit. And so I came up with an idea which is honestly not very good, but during the game I thought it's reasonable. Okay, if I don't want to push the center and don't want to play the standard moves here, those standard moves, then maybe I fix the problem with the queen first, and I consider this a4, because often like gaining space, it's a typical pattern, and especially if you have a closed game, there is not much action in the center, you can really afford this. And when you're white, you often can afford this even more because you can waste this one move because you're ahead in development, and if your opponent plays something forcing in the center then you can still react as if you were black. So it cannot be harmful so much, and he needs to decide if he wants to stop it or grant me some more space there. So I thought a4 is like a tricky move to meet. And I played this because I think you should always play the position no matter who is your opponent. If you think it's a good move, you need to play it, because otherwise you will never like be able to judge your decisions later if you're just guessing and you think like, okay, I think this is the right move, but I do something else because I don't trust this. Or you need to do what you really think is a good move. So I played this, and he was actually quite a bit shocked. That was quite funny to see his expression after this. He didn't expect this one. And he played c5 quite quickly. And I said, okay, well, maybe I weaken those squares here a bit too much. And yeah, I didn't like my move that much. Because now I realized, I mean, I need to go something in the center anyway, and maybe I should have started with e4, but okay, not regretting decisions. I just played e4 here. Of course, c4 I can never play again, because then I have big holes in my camp. But e4 I thought like, it's like a Sicilian maybe, where I play a4, try to get my queen out, but basically this is like Sicilian type of structure. So knight c6, knight c3 played, and yeah, it's not that uncommon. So now he surprised me with a move, and during the game I thought it's quite a great move, which I completely didn't have on my radar. Queen to b8. So the problem I saw with pawn c4, knight c3 is that my queen would be stuck, but somehow he evaluated this better and found this way that the queen can get activated now via b8, c7, also hitting some key squares. I'm no longer able to play f4, which I actually planned to do. So here I was feeling, okay, this went already a bit wrong, but okay, shouldn't be too horrible, but still I was not happy here at this stage. So that's why I played g3. I wanted to play f4, limit his queen, and also gain just some space in the center. And I thought, okay, what can he do? I thought he would not like to play e5 because it gives me some square, and then I will just develop this way probably, and maybe route the knight also towards d5. Don't need to decide on this one yet, but bishop c4 is a sensible way to bring the pieces out, for example. That was not his intention. He went g5, which I also had not had on my radar before, but yeah, in the game I didn't like it for me. But after the game, when we discussed and so on, he didn't like this move for himself because he told that it leaves quite a lot of vulnerability in his camp, and yeah, later he will suffer a bit under those weaknesses. Actually, black could have gotten a huge advantage here with knight d4. I considered that I can just play bishop g2 and cover this hole, but after e5, he has quite good control over the center and this aforementioned hole on d5, which I wanted to target with my bishop. It's no longer possible because the bishop is so locked in on g2, and that's not good news for white. So black is having a huge center. My pieces are still kind of awkward here, and black is much better. But he didn't go for this. He played g5 instead. So after g5, I played f3. I think this makes sense. Now my bishops are activated, and now with knight d4, I was ready to trade. But overlooking one tiny detail here, e5 is much better for black now because he controls so much space, and also especially this b4 square. In my calculations, I just thought bishop g7 is more or less natural, and then b4 was my intention. And this is in fact not so bad because sometimes I even try to pick up the pawn. And if not, I mean, I have also some space on the queen side. If he kicks my knight later, for example, after this bishop is not here where it would be good, but it is locked in on g7 as well. And after a6, I just drop the knight back. Sometimes I can even go c4 and I have a good position. So this trade on d4, which was my intention, it was objectively not good, but not so easy to punish. However, that did never happen. He played e6 instead. Quite a logical move, which I think fits well into the pawn structure. Those pawns are here, so somebody needs to cover the holes, which the g5 and the c5 pawn left. So he's covering those squares. Very logical play. So now I need to come up with a plan how to develop further or do something useful in my position. And this is maybe the moment in the opening where I was most unhappy, because I thought, okay, if I move my knight, maybe he will just try to target like this, and the g3 might be vulnerable. Meanwhile, if I move the bishop, he might also do the same, and the h2 would be vulnerable. Also, with this bishop, there is not such a great perspective because this e6 pawn is limiting the bishop quite a lot. So I thought, okay, why not stick to the initial plan, improving further on the queen side. a5. Now finally my queen is able to really get out of the corner, and maybe I can play a6. But about this key structural decision, I was very unsure. Should I push a6? Should I wait on a5 and rather hope him to play a6 himself? I couldn't really judge, but I will now share with you what the correct evaluation of this one is. So he played f6, which I did not understand at all, but we will soon figure out why this move is useful. Instead, a6 is bad for him because knight a4, and he cannot cover this hole. The knight will be huge. Also, c5 might drop at this stage. a5 is untouchable because knight to b6, and I have a double attack. So he didn't play a6, but f6. And the idea was that if I play a6, which I should have done, because it really weakens those light squares, gives me this excellent spot to sit on, and a7 might be weak eternally. Then he has this plan that he can challenge my knight, and that was his idea with f6. But still, I should have gone for it. For example, queen a4, and now after knight f7, I can castle, and white is a bit better. I have this b4 square. In the game, I misevaluated this because I thought maybe the position is too closed and I will never make progress, but even though I never break through, I can sit here in quite an annoying way, and he needs to deal with it. And he's not breaking through anywhere else either, so it's enough to be a bit annoying in order to be a bit better here. So I should have gone for this, but instead I was waiting around. Queen a4, I thought, get the queen out. But now he finally played a6, and the reason is this now works because the queen is occupying the spot where my knight could jump into b6. So I need more time, and in this time he will solve this issue. So I played queen to a3 back, hitting this pawn here. And it's very hard to defend because I'm also threatening to jump there with the knight, for example, d6. It's too slow. Knight a4, queen c7, knight b6 with a huge position for white. So he played queen c7, but this offers me the central c5 pawn, and I was the first time in the game happy again, because now I could trade this stuff off and I have the more central pawns, and I thought this endgame is just a little better for me. And since I thought I was even worse before, I was quite relieved. So here I played d4, taking the center. I think the most important thing in this position strategically is that I manage to prevent this plan that he will sit here with the knight, because then I'm kind of passive and his bishop will be a good bishop. My bishop will be the bad bishop. All the pawns are on the light squares. So I really should try to prevent a knight from having a stable outpost on d4. So that's why I played d4. And my intention was that if he attacks this pawn, then castling rights, I can castle queenside without really moving my king and the rook very far, but defending the d4 pawn. And now if he challenges it, my plan would have been to take. Because if I move d5, then he will sit here quite stably, and it's not so easy to challenge the knight because c2 is under pressure. White is still okay, but nothing more than this. Instead, if you take, and he takes with a knight, the knight will be kicked around later with f4, and there is no stable outpost. Meanwhile, if he takes with the pawn, also this outpost is less stable because I have f4 ideas trying to target the base of the pawn chain so that the knight will be unstable. For example, bishop h3, knight d4 and f4, and white is a little better. He didn't go for this, so instead he went knight to g6, improving the other knight first. I played knight f2, h5, bishop d3, normal development stuff, bishop f7, and here was a really crucial moment, because I have developed all my pieces, but it's not easy to break through, and at this stage it's important to create some tiny weakness in the opponent's camp. And the move I was considering a lot was playing e5, because suddenly the g5 pawn might turn weak. Also, I might get access to the d6 square, and altogether this looks quite promising. But the reason I wasn't playing this was that I thought in this position here he might target the e5 pawn immediately, and I think I more or less just consider bishop g6, which transposes back to something which we will see in a minute. But instead, knight f to e4 would have been very strong, hitting here, threatening a fork there, and things are very, very dangerous for black. In fact, something like short castle is a way to go, but after this also white is a little better. I have the more compact pawn structure, fewer weaknesses, and quite some active play. His bishop is a bit stupid there. So this would be a good moment to go e5, but I thought I will just prepare for it first and maybe go for e5 later, because I could not see this knight f to e4, just a trade, and I was not very convinced. Castles, and now he played knight c6. And here I knew he's ready to play e5 next, and if I don't play e5 now, I will never be able. So this was the moment where I was again spending quite some time to make this move work. Again, because I fixed the d6 square, I make this g5 pawn vulnerable in case he plays f5. I could play knight e2 and later target the g5 pawn, for example. So that's the upside, but again, I saw the downside that he might just take. And the line I calculated was mainly remove the knight so that I will be able to capture on e5 safely, and then jump with the knight to e4, hit here and there. But I saw the counterplay, rook f8, and I calculated this whole long line. Check, fork, not fork, but hitting the bishop. He can take here, but he has no good discoveries, because I will always take the bishop. But he moves the bishop. I play something like this, and maybe I have an attack or something, but maybe not. And I'm a pawn down. If he takes here, I'm pinned. So I really couldn't judge this, and I didn't like to throw the dice here and really make it a mess, not knowing how the position is, because before it's not looking that desperate. Actually, it's looking quite decent if I just play solid. So I didn't really like to go to this where the outcome is more random. So I tried to keep the control. However, after this e5, fe5, again, this knight jump to e4 immediately would have been very strong. Again, hitting targets. And things are not easy for black. However, at this stage, I didn't really consider it, I must say. The real moment where I think I missed it in human terms was one move earlier. There it was much clearer, and I could have found this. So instead I played knight e2, protecting the d4, staying solid, however allowing him to put the pawns on dark squares, which he did, but which is indeed not good. So he should just have improved his position first with king e7, because I have no pawn breaks any longer. Really, I can maybe solidify a bit, like maybe c3, king d2, maybe move the rook here, maybe try some f4 or something. I can improve a tiny bit, but it's nothing critical for black. But after this e5, I have quite some chance to get a substantial advantage. So I played d5, and first I thought he would jump here, because if I take, he might get the e5 square. But as a downside, he would probably also just drop the pawn. So probably that's what he didn't like here. Not entirely sure, but this looks like might should be good. So he went to b4. And here I was actually quite happy with my decision, that I did not go for this natural looking c3, but instead play king d2. And we will see the difference between those two moves. So the first thing about c3 is it also creates some weaknesses in my camp. It wastes some time, and it's not maybe necessary to ask this knight, because this knight, it has no route backwards, and it will never have. So at some point the knight will be exchanged, like voluntarily. So that's why I don't need to waste time, and I also don't need to like make my light squares here vulnerable, I think. So now I need to be fast to get b3, c4, otherwise I might have some issues there. Let's have a look at some concrete line. For example, here I need to take, and after d6, king d2, f5, counterplay is coming fast enough. And after b3, g4, takes, he will pick up my center. And here we really see it's so crucial that I wasted this time. And that's why black is doing very fine here. If I instead had a pawn here, which we will see in a second, it would work out way better for white, and white would indeed be winning. So this king d2, if he now would do the same, I would be more or less 1 or even 2 tempi up, because I didn't waste time on this, which is a whole tempo, because the pawn wants to go there. It can go there in one go. And also the king is better here than on c1, because it's out of the c file and so on. And now this whole thing, it would turn out to be a disaster for black. First d6, b3, f5, c4. This would now be a disaster for black, because in this position where black previously could take here, he can't take there, and I would just pick up this pawn in the center, having a winning position. I hit this pawn. I'm a pawn up on this side as well. So this king d2, it was a good move, and I really liked it, because it's saving time. The pawn wants to go to c4, so why waste time with c3 in the first place? So king d2 played, pawn d6, rook a1, rook f8. My plan was activating the rook, maybe asking the knight with the rook, so not wasting time, and improving the rook at the same time. However, at this point it would have been better to play knight c3. I considered this, seeing the option that I might threaten to return the bishop, so that the knight won't be able to trade himself against a bishop and then just trap the knight, because cannot be guarded. a5 drops the a5 pawn, and so bishop f1 is a huge threat. However, I thought the knight is a bit clumsy here, and the knight is just misplaced, having no prospects. That's why I thought I would move the rook, because the knight is in the way of the c pawn and so on. However, I could take here with the c pawn, so that the knight is no longer in the way of the c pawn. I stabilize my center. This is very good against any f5 counterplay, and also I can try to create some trouble on the queen side. For example, b4, king e7, and I'm well prepared against all kind of counterplay. f5 takes, and my knights are jumping into the position, and they have some good outposts there, here and there. So knight c3 would have been a bit better according to the machine, but rook a4 was not that stupid either, and he now traded. I traded with the knight, and I was still quite confident in this position, because I thought my plan is easy. I want to go something like push those pawns forward, maybe also hit the b7. Two types of plans, but both of them made me optimistic. And bishop to e8, asking my rook where to go, and I decided to attack the pawn on b7. Pawn to b5. This is a slight mistake, because it leaves this a6 pawn quite vulnerable, and I can immediately attack on the a file. Instead, he should have played bishop to b5, went after knight to c3, Bishop is traded off, but I can at least strengthen my center so that f5 counterplay is not so critical because e4 is just bolstered. So also here white keeps slight pressure against this pawn here, but after king c7, rook c1, knight e7, it's nothing too serious for black. There are no serious discoveries threatened because after knight b5 he could just step to d7. So let's go to the game. He decided to play b5. I played rook a1, that was pretty clear to me. He needs to go passive with his rook. And now for a moment I thought I'm winning a pawn here and I got quite excited. However, I realized that after knight c3, trying to win this b5 pawn due to the pin on the a-file, I realized he has one defense. And it's not a5, because after a5 I can actually just take with the knight anyway, because this pawn is still pinned. And if he tries to make use of a pin on the b-file, I can just take the a5 pawn as well. And if he does nothing, I can just move my rook or even just continue grabbing pawns. So that was not the solution, but king c7. And the point here is that after a trade on b5, this rook on a8 will no longer be undefended, and I would even lose material here. This tactic doesn't work because once a bishop is gone, this rook is defended and the a6 pawn no longer pinned. So that didn't work, so I decided, to look for something else. And I actually considered the best continuation, but I didn't go for it because I didn't see a follow-up. So let me show you. I consider rook to b3. Very logical. He needs to bring his king because I attacked the a6 and he needs to be in time to guard it. So king b6 guarding, and now I considered putting my rook to a5 first so that he cannot set the pawns into motion, fix the weakness on a6, and then bring the next attacker in. However, he's just in time to also bring his bishop to the defense, bishop d7, attack and defend. And at this point I thought I might be stuck. There is no pressure I can add, and in the meantime he will have all the counterplay on the king side, and my rooks are a bit offside on the a-file. So here I was more or less not seeing a way through, even though it looks like pressure. I thought my pieces might get too sidelined there, so I discarded this option. However, it would have been good, and I could have played aggressively with b3, f5, and now knight to c3. This is a difficult move. I actually considered just something like this, and I thought it's incredibly messy. For example, what happens if he just takes, or what happens if he just kind of protects the rook so that he can recapture there. But things are critical here for black. So not so easy. For example, after c4, a correct line goes something like this, rook f2, and he's getting counterplay. I might take b5, but he might just not care, and I'm not promoting a pawn, and he has counterplay on the other wing of the board. So the best according to the computer here is after c3, f5 to go knight to c3, which often has the idea that sometimes I even take on f5 and just hop in with the knight to hit some targets. For example, bishop e7 takes, and knight e4. Didn't really consider this, and after rook f3, computer wants something like this. And after rook af8, trying for some counter attack, I could actually take on a6. Of course, this is a long line, and this is far from what happened in the game, but the point I want to make is that I could have played against this weakness on a6 because I have some forces how I can increase the pressure even further. However, I went for the move which is probably leading to some more equalish position, however also opening the position, and that's what I thought is a good thing. c4. After the game he told that he was thinking that he's equalizing after this. I was not quite sure. I still felt white's position is a bit more comfortable, but it's getting very close to equal. Now I expected something like bishop b5, trade, and I thought in this position also only white can be better when there is some rook b6 invasion. I just have the more active pieces, and I'm in control of everything here. However, he didn't move the bishop to b5 but went f5 immediately. I now played rook to b4. I needed to watch out for some g4 undermining, because if I then take there he might take the center, but I calculated that it might just not work, as here I think I even might just take here first, because if he takes here I might take there, and if he takes on f5 then I just win a pawn. So it doesn't really work like this. Also this line takes. I think white is in very good shape. Maybe I insert this move, then he needs to move the rook there, And then I have quite a bunch of options, I guess. Maybe even rook b7 or rook b6, and only later taking the pawn here. So he couldn't do this, so instead he decided just not to undermine, but to trade on e4 and activate his rook. And at this point I already got a bit excited because I thought maybe this is a silent draw for. However, of course, if I have the advantage, I should try. But why is this a silent draw for maybe? I was considering knight g1 because the rook has no squares and needs to retreat. And if I then go back, he needs to come up with something else. However, don't get lured by such a thing, because I thought it's helping him because he wouldn't go back to f7, but instead go to f6. And if I then go back, he has improved his rook to f6. And why is it improved? I thought because he now guards the d6 pawn and makes my threat of rook to b6, yeah, less strong. So I thought it might be timid to just play for the draw, and also it might just help him to organize his rook better. So I discarded this move, and this was actually my big error, because this is not a drawing attempt but a winning attempt, but with another idea. Instead I went for rook b6, and after king c7 he needs to defend it. I cannot take the a6 because tactics work in his favor. Takes, and check, and I will lose my rook after a bishop fork on b5. So I went back, and also he needs to go back with his king, because now rook c1 threatened, followed by the invasion of the rook, and that would be quite critical. So he stepped back, so that if I invade with my rook, then he would be like, yeah, not bothered by some rook on the c file already. So I decided to repeat the moves here, because I didn't find anything better. It's not so easy actually. If I want to go to the c file first, now he could block the b file, because I no longer have a pin on the a file and cannot take on b5. So I didn't fancy this line too much, so I repeated the moves. Let me quickly show you the winning attempt, which was connected with this move, but after rook f6, I should have tried knight to h3, which he of course saw, but I did not really consider this too much. The point being very simple. I attack this pawn and the knight will invade, have a lot of good outposts there, and it's quite dangerous for him. After this, he needs to watch out for this. Also, he still needs to watch out for some rook b6 ideas, and white would be pushing a bit. There are still ways to hold the game, but this would have put some more pressure than I did. However, I was also not too unhappy to repeat the moves and make a draw against a very strong guy, number 12 in the world, my best draw in my whole chess life so far. So I was very happy, and yeah, I hope I could share some insights into the thought process, some interesting moments. If you like the recaps, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate that, and I hope to see you in the next one. Goodbye.